Recently, I got so many recommendations from viewers that I had to make a video. Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is Angela, and yes, I got under my last video about my favorite female writers so many fabulous recommendations by you, my viewers, that I thought, hey, I make a video and I share. I do get recommendations mostly under my roundup videos, but they're like, I don't know, 2, 3, maximum 4 maybe per video. But with this video, I got something like a dozen recommendations, and they're all really fabulous. So I thought, hey, let's do a video. And well, we'll be doing those in alphabetical order this time. So, first time up is Catherine Arden and her Winter Night trilogy. The first is The Bear and the Nightingale, and it's then followed by The Girl in the Tower and The Winter of the Witch. And this seems to be kind of like historical fantasy with, yeah, a good infusion of Russian folklore, where we meet Vasila Petrovna, and she is able to see all those creatures from folklore and myth and able to communicate with them. And this seems to kind of like get her in trouble with the church because they see her as a witch. And that seems to be the setup of this trilogy. This has been recommended to me several times by now by other booktubers. I remember Joanna, who was kind of like very much saying, you have to read this. But I also have friends around me who have recommended this and that you have to read this. So I get the strong feeling that this might be on my next TBR. Okay, the next in line is Marion Zimmer Bradley with her Mists of Avalon. Now, I actually read Mists of Avalon a long time ago. Not when it came out directly, because I remember that I read it in English, so it must have been the late 80s, I reckon. And yes, I found it a really good book, like a lot of people at the time. It's an Arthurian retelling from a very feminist perspective. So we have very strong feminist characters in this book. And yeah, so this is before the allegations surfaced against Marion Zimmer Bradley. Since then, Marion Zimmer Bradley has, yeah, like a lot of authors, when allegations are made, people are not really willing to pick up her books anymore, which is understandable. As far as I can remember, The Mists of Avalon does not glorify abuse in any form or against anybody. So if you want to read The Mists of Avalon, it's, I think, still possible. Also, if you say, I don't want the author to profit, or in this case, the estate of the author to profit, her publisher, Victor Gollancz, who holds the rights for her e-catalog, so the e-books. When the allegations was made, Gollancz decided that all proceeds from her e-books will go to a charity that is involved with abuse victims. So there is that as well. So if you want to read it and say, well, but I don't want anybody to profit, so if you buy the e-book, the likelihood that somebody profits is very small. Okay, my next recommendation, or better, your next recommendation for me, is Kira Jane Buxton. She seems to be a relatively new author. I hadn't heard of her before. And the book that you recommend is Hollow Kingdom from 2019. And this sounds really quirky. It seems to be set in a post-apocalyptic world and is told from the viewpoint of a pet crow. Yeah, you heard me. A bird is the narrator of the story. And this crow, this bird, finds out that the owner isn't doing too well. He's getting sick, and sick in a very disturbing way as well. And yeah, the bird tries to kind of like alleviate this by, for example, feeding him some beer with its beak. So it's a very quirky story on one level, but also then at some stage Crow, and I think that the name are only two initials, ST, has to go out in the world and try to find out what's going on. And yes, it's not looking good for humankind. So this is definitely a story for me, I have to say, because if you follow this channel, you know I have a thing when it comes to animal companions. Crone from the Malazan Book of the Fallen, I think she's fabulous. I adore Crone. She's not a crow, she's a big raven, a great raven, but hey, somebody else from the raven family as a protagonist, give it to me. Sold. Definitely going to read this, but not tomorrow now, but at some stage. Another author you recommend to me is C.J. Cherryh. Her full name is Carolyn Janice Cherryh without the H at the end. That was added by her publishers, who thought otherwise her name would sound more like something like a romance writer. And yeah, she writes primarily science fiction. Her themes seem to be how the other finds their place. Also kind of how do we relate to those outsider figures, and exploration of gender roles seems to be another one of her big topics. So yeah, you recommended to me Down Below Station, which seems to be something like a space opera, but also dealing with things like corporate greed, capitalist structures, gender roles, as I said. Yeah, it sounds like a wonderfully complex novel, and I really, really love complex. So that seems like something I might enjoy. So yeah, and I think I will give Down Below Station definitely a try. The next author that you recommended is one that actually should have been on my list, and I can't really understand why I forgot about her, because I love her writing, and this is Susanna Clarke. I've read Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, and I mean, you recently heard me raving about Piranesi, which is just fabulous. So why she's not on the list, I have no idea. I don't know. Yeah, unforgivable. I seem not to be just a bad reader, I'm also a lousy booktuber, because how could I forget Susanna Clarke? So yeah, she has only written those two novels, and they couldn't be more different. Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell deals with yeah, a 19th century alternate England, yeah, where there is no magic anymore, until the two majors, Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, appear and want to reinstate magic, but in very, very different ways. So one wants magic to be just an elite thing that only a very select few get access to, and the other wants it to be much broader and a much more everyday thing. And it's a very long and sprawling book. Also, it's stylistically in parts mimicking 19th century style. It's very much orientated by the literature of the Romantics. And then we have her latest from 2020, Piranesi, which is very, very different. It's very short. It's, I think, not even 250 pages. And yeah, a very, on one level, dreamy book, but also on another level, a very almost disturbing book with what might be happening, might not be happening. It's very hard to describe this book without spoiling it, but we meet Piranesi, and he is in this absolutely fabulous house that is endless. Piranesi doesn't know how many halls and rooms there are, and the rooms are kind of like, yeah, it's like museums with columns and statues. And in the basement there is an oceans in this house, and he has one other person with him, which he only refers to as the other. And yeah, that's the setup for Piranesi, and telling you anything more would just mean that you spoil the book, because you really have to read it and let, yeah, the narration in kind of like take place to see what this book is about. Your next recommendation is a writer I had heard about, but I haven't read anything by. I've heard about her more from her non-fiction that she has written. She's written a book called The Geek Feminist Revolution, and this is what I know her mostly for. But your recommendation for me is God's War. This is the first in a trilogy called the Beldame Apocrypha, and this sounds really very quirky, very interesting. It seems to be set on a desert planet. Yeah, Dune vibes in a way. But we also seem to have an insect race or insect technology. We have a matriarchal society that's partly inspired by Islam. Yeah, two things we, at least as Westerners, wouldn't necessarily bring together. And yeah, it sounds really very interesting, I have to say. So thanks for that recommendation. Cameron Hurley calls this type of fiction, and especially this trilogy, bug punk. And I think that's an excellent term for it from the sounds of it. And yes, she has written a lot. She's a very prolific writer. She also has written a grim, dark, epic fantasy series with the title Worldbreaker Saga. So yeah, I get the feeling that I have a lot to explore with this writer. The next author that you recommended is Anne McCaffrey. And yeah, Irish name, so she's American Irish, but in the 1970s seemed to have gotten divorced and moved to, yeah, Dublin. So, hey, and she seems to be best known for her Dragon Riders of Pern series, and the first of this is Dragon Flight. This seems to be a series where humans are able to form a very strong telepathic bond with a dragon. And yeah, this seems to go to the point that if this human dies that is bonded with a dragon like that, then the dragon will die as well. So yeah, sounds very much like, how shall I say, medieval type epic fantasy. But yeah, definitely another author that sounds very, very interesting. And I'm actually sorry I didn't know about her earlier, because she spent the rest of her life living here in Ireland, living in Dublin. Unfortunately, she died in 2011. Otherwise, I could have just popped by and say hello, but not anymore. The next on the list is one of this early female trailblazers that have put women and fantasy written by women onto the map, and this is C.L. Moore. She is basically a colleague of Robert E. Howard and Edgar Rice Burroughs, and published in the same pulp magazines as those authors published. And was treated quite equally, because the story that I got recommended is called The Black God's Kiss, and this was the cover story of the magazine Weird Tales in 1934. And also it's one of the stories that are centered on her female sword woman character that she came up with, Jiriel of Joiry. And yeah, so there's sword and sorcery, but with a female lead character, and a very strong female character. And there seems to be still available a collection of her stories under the same title, The Black God's Kiss. So I definitely have to check this out, because I haven't read her, which is really a crime, and I really need to plug this huge gap in my fantasy knowledge. The next couple of authors are, again, more newer authors, and the first of them is Samantha Shannon and her book The Priory of the Orange Tree from 2019. This seems to be a feminist or female retelling of the St. George and the Dragon story. Otherwise, I don't really know much more about this book, but it seems to have a huge range of female characters that are described as very strong female characters, so lots of female agency, and something like that, of course, is bang down my line. Now, it also seems to be a very fat book, but hey, at some stage I will have finished Melazen and I can read other very, very big books. The next author on this list then is Catherine Valente, and I've read only one book by her, and that's Palimpsest. In Palimpsest we have 4 characters who all have suffered some form of loss, and this is what this book is mainly about loss, grief, and each of them going on their individual quest to deal with this. And they all meet some stranger, and this stranger tattoos part of a map onto their body. And this map then brings them all together into this city called Palimpsest. And yeah, they meet there. And as I say, it's a quest story. It's about grief. It's about loss and how to deal with it. The books that you have recommended to me are Deathless and Glasstown Game. Glasstown Game is about the Bronte siblings who had invented this game of an alternate fantasy land that they called Glasstown, and this seems to be a fictionalized narration of this. Deathless is again one of those, how shall I say, fairy tale myth retellings. It's set in St. Petersburg, this time not a medieval Russia, but the Russia of the Russian Revolution. And again, we meet a young woman who is able to sense or communicate with creatures from those stories. And that seems to be the setup for Deathless. And the last recommendations are for an author that I mentioned, and that is Jenny Woods. The Jenny Woods love seems to be endless on the internet at the moment, and also with viewers on my channel. And you recommended 2 things by Jenny Woods for me. One is her standalone novel, To Write Hell's Chasm, which I have been recommended before, but under that particular video, as I say, the Jenny Woods love was very, very strong in the comment section. And probably rightly so. I think she's a fantastic writer. The other books that you recommended is a series. It's called the Cycle of Fire trilogy, and it contains Storm Warden, Keeper of the Key, and Shadow Fame. Okay, thank you to everybody who left recommendations for me. They're highly appreciated. Keep them coming, please. And thanks for contributing to this video. And I'll see you in the next one. Until then, happy reading and all the best.